Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Here's the first image, commissioned image I did about 6 years ago for my first client. It's pretty bad. I'll actually do like a proper teardown of it next week. But I learned so much from it that I think it would be a shame not to acknowledge it and to dig a little bit deeper. So I kind of want you to be aware of this idea of revisiting bad work and kind of invite you to do the same. So let's talk a little bit more about our bad work. So one thing we kind of noticed lately is that the standard of the industry of archviz is getting better and better. So there's like a really high industry standard. And what it has is like, I guess it comes from this sort of overwhelming presence of social media in our lives. And what it has as a sort of like symmetrical consequence is that people tend to hide their bad work a little bit more and actually never come back to it. Thinking like this is not good enough, I won't post it, and more than that, they really never revisit their work. So while this might not be good enough to be posted, and it's like completely up to you anyway, we all sure did start from zero, and we all produce unequal work throughout our career. So even if you have like a gift, you still need to like learn things and in order to get better at something. So what I think is like, even if you don't necessarily have to show it to the world, but you shouldn't hide it from your own eyes. And I'll sort of like explain you why right now. So first, what do I mean by like shitty work or crappy or bad work? First, this is like really purely subjective. And what might be bad for you might be good for others, and what might be good for others might actually be bad for you. So again, it's really, really subjective. So it's kind of like up to you. So what I would say is like general considerations about like what I would consider bad work in general is this idea of like something you're unhappy with. Like you had a great idea of something in your head and you're starting to work, and like the end result really doesn't come close to what you had in your mind, which is pretty common, unfortunately. It can also be something you're not proud of to the point of actually showing it. So it's like decent, but you won't put it on your portfolio, basically. This happens also quite a lot. This can also lead to this idea of like a work that you did, but where something went wrong at some point, and you like it didn't end up as good as it was planned. So this is like this sort of really basic idea of like the client ruined my images or something like that, which is something we hear a little bit too often, and that I'll probably deal with in one video because whatever. This is a little bit too much of a topic anyway. And also it can also lead to this idea of like something that is less good than what you see on social media or on your favorite websites, which is pretty common as well, to see other people doing better work than you do or than we do and whatever. So that's what would sort of encompass the idea of like bad work. So even though we all do like bad work every now and then, I think there's one main idea that we need to understand, is that this idea that you can't compare your image to other people's images, or at least to a certain point. In this sort of like social media frenzy where everything is always getting better and better and more inspiring, I personally am trying to stay away a little from all social media such as Instagram and Facebook and whatever, because even though the amount of work out there is really great and like amazing, it was still like this idea that it's a little bit too curated to be actually worthwhile and valid for any analysis. Because beyond saying, yes, this is good work, this is interesting, I can't really draw any more information than what I can see from it, which actually when it comes to commission work is paramount. What you need to learn is not like how to make an image, but how to deal with the client, how to actually use the brief that your client is giving you, turning it to something more interesting and turn it into like a decent image. It's not like about just copy pasting composition, basically. So basically this idea is that you can't really do any progress just by looking at images on Instagram. You don't need like, also it's the thing is like, you don't need to put many references and grab ideas from the web, because what you need is not like hundreds of images, but like just a couple or dozen or whatever of properly curated and understood images of references in order to properly progress. I'll dig deeper into this idea of like how to manage references in another video, because this is a pretty fundamental topic. Also, one thing is that there's a strong bias of social media that sort of alter the reality. It is normal. I mean, this is what they're for, kind of. But most of the people who post stuff there want to look good. So they're here to boost their visibility and potentially draw clients, etc. So even their work in progress will be pretty amazing. But they won't, like, most of the people won't ever post stuff that would degrade their reputation or that would potentially make them lose potential clients, which is completely fine, but still something you have to keep in mind. So in order to put into perspective why I think this is not really interesting to focus too much on this sort of aspect, I want to point out some of the many things that you can't really assess from just looking at images on social media. First thing is that you don't know the time frame. For instance, maybe like an image you really find amazing took like 3 weeks to be done instead of like the usual 3 or 4 days you can afford to take for an image for a client or something like that. You also don't know the brief, which is something that is really important. Depending on the brief, you can end up with completely different visuals. And here I'm not saying that it's easier to make a good image when the brief is right, but it still kind of is if the brief is letting you do stuff. The thing is, it's actually up to you to lead the brief to something that would let you do the right images, but this is another discussion. You also don't know the experience of the guy. Most of the time you will know, like, have a rough idea of how many years they've been practicing, but maybe they're actually saying, I've been practicing for 6 years, but I've been actually drawing and doing other stuff for the last 20 years. Or maybe, like, even though they're like people that can be amazingly talented at like 15 or 20 years old, there are like other people that you think are actually quite young, but they've actually had like so much experience in other departments that you don't even know of, and that would actually make you more aware of where you might be lacking. Also, you don't even know like the sort of like pricing they are doing on their, like how much they charge for an image and how, like, what is their overall expense, what they're using in terms of software, etc. You also don't know how many people worked on the image. Most of the time it's going to be like, if it's a freelancer, of course, you know, it must be just one guy, but sometimes for like bigger firms, you don't know if it's like a single person or if it's like a short team of like 3 or 4 people. For instance, it's like if you look at a pretty amazing video of like animation, you're like, wow, this is amazing, I wish I could do that. But then it's like, yeah, you know, there's like actually 10 people that worked on this and you're alone. So for sure, you can't really expect to do the same, to deliver the same amount of quality in the same time frame. You also don't know usually how many revisions have been done with the client. Maybe they actually just did a one shot and actually ended up with what they wanted, or maybe it took actually months of work to actually get there. And compared to what you actually do, maybe you won't be able to actually compare what if it would fit in your workflow or not at all. Also, you don't know the rest of their portfolio. There's like, I've had really weird experiences when I was working in architecture firms back in Paris in like 6 or 7 years ago. And I had the same actually when I was working in Sydney, is that there are some really established archviz studios that will have amazing portfolios online. And when you work with them, you actually get like really poor visuals because there's a high discrepancy between what they show on their portfolio, which is of course their best work, and that you would sort of expect it to be the standard, where actually their standard is much lower and they're actually delivering sometimes work that is not really that amazing. So it has this sort of like discrepancy that sort of shows you that even good studios do some crappy images every now and then, which is completely understandable, and I'm not like blaming them, but it's just, it puts into perspective that what you see there is not what they show and what they do all the time. So it's sort of like helps you to reassess like your own product quality basically, and the sort of like standard that you have and that you deliver to your client. One other thing that is funny is that since nowadays we're seeing more and more images through Instagram, which is kind of a shitty platform when you think about it when it comes to looking at proper images and proper details, the fun thing is that there's like 2 consequences of looking at Instagram. The first one is that images are extremely small, so you actually can't really focus on details, and it happens many times that images that look nice on Instagram actually look like crap on a proper 4K display or whatever. And also the other thing that is more interesting, especially for me, is that when you look at smaller images, you actually tend to focus more on composition. And when you focus more on composition, it actually helps you to understand like the actual quality of an image, because the technical aspect is interesting. It is kind of like the industry standard is getting higher and higher, but the composition itself is getting, I won't say lower and lower, but there's like a big lack for me in like what people are doing in terms of composition with their image. And they're like kind of compensating with high technical deliverables, which is actually not really what the clients are after most of the time. But whatever, the idea is that it's actually interesting to see that on a simple thumbnail on Instagram, you can sort of better judge the style of a studio rather than their like technical ability. Bear in mind though that I'm definitely not trying to like minimize the quality of the work that people are doing, like archviz artists, and that they for sure do like incredible work. But what I want you to understand is that it makes no sense for you to compare your work to them in a sort of really straightforward manner, because there are too many parameters at play when you're like doing an image, a commission image with a client on a specific project, to just compare simply the quality of the work. Like if you compare work A to work B simply on the quality, but completely discard all the other factors, then you can't really assess what is the real difference between the two works. And maybe all these informations that you don't have would help you reconsider that images is really not that good after all, or that maybe you wouldn't be willing to work that way with those criteria to actually end up with that result. What I mean by that is that, for instance, if you have like an image that you find amazing, but the artist is telling you, well, I had to spend like 60 hours in 3 days on this image for the client to be happy. Well, I would personally be like, okay, I would definitely never work that amount of hours for a single client and for a single image. So I would rather like do something differently and not like have that amazing end result if it takes that amount of sacrifice, because there's other stuff in life than work. And on the other hand, maybe there's like a really amazing image and you're like, this is nice, but the artist is telling you, yeah, I had to completely bypass the client intent, and the client was actually pretty unhappy with the image. Well, for me, this is definitely not what I would say like a successful image, in the sense that what we're doing is doing images for clients. We're not just doing images for fun. So if a good image is actually not the client was asking for, and that they wanted something different, then it wouldn't sort of fit my standards, and I wouldn't be really interested in doing an image like that in the end. So even though you can still learn from the image by analyzing some stuff, you can't really be really straightforward in saying, I want to do images like that, because there's so much behind it that could actually not fit your standards, that you have to always reassess like this sort of hierarchy of what you want to do with your actual images and your career in general. Why it's important to keep your image or bad work and go back to it every now and then. There's two main categories why it matters. It's like skills and mindset. In terms of skills, it will help you assess your progress. For instance, if I look at the image I was using in the introduction and look at one of my latest image now, I can see there's been progress. I can see there's actually been progress in two ways. For sure, I can see that the second one is better than that first one, but also I can see that I'm pretty sure that if I looked at the image on the right 6 years ago, I would find it better than what I find it now, because even if I'm happy with the image that I've done, I still see many things that could be done differently and that I would work more. The thing is that I know that I don't like to spend too much time on an image, so at some point you have to consider it done, and then, well, I'll just do something and be happy with it and move on to something else. It helps also in terms of like assessing your failure, because as I said, is like an image can be like interesting and someone can boast like a nice image and say this is amazing, but at the same time maybe the actual relationship with the client and the overall project didn't go well. So the only way to actually have this type of information is with your own work, and maybe you can actually assess what was a failure for you and how you can make it better next time. Whereas if you actually just look at social media stuff, everything seems to be amazing and pink and everything is right, whereas it's most of the time maybe it is, but you can't really know for sure. Whereas for your own work, you can assess properly if this was a success or a failure, and you can learn from it. You also, and this is, I'm really like client driven and client centered in my business relationship. So I know that I will learn a lot from my clients rather than from random people on the internet. And I know that from my past work, I can assess what worked and what didn't work with my client. And this is something that is extremely valuable because it is extremely personal. It is personal in the sense that this is the style you want to work in terms of like relationship. And it's also personal because it will tie back to the type of client portfolio that you have. And maybe for some other types of clients, it would completely not work, but maybe for the actual client that you're working with, it will work. So this is something extremely valuable that you have to understand and sort of learn from your own mistakes. And also it will help you, and this is one of the big thing I think that I'm trying to convey through the Horoma critiques, is this idea that you can sort of tackle the brief differently once you have more experience. So this is actually a good way to learn how much experience you've acquired, is that when you look at an image and you can see how much differently you would do it. Sometimes it's like in simple details, sometimes it's like completely different. So this is really interesting to sort of have this revelation sometimes, to be like, whoa, I've actually learned so much because this idea that I had that I thought was good back in the day, I know why it doesn't work. And I know why or what I should propose to my client, how to propose it to him or her, and how to actually deliver something better. In terms of mindset, I think there's something that is pretty interesting with working from your own stuff and like learning from your own things, is that it brings you more joy to see progress, because you actually know that this is all your fault or all your work basically. Because I know that some people get motivated by looking at other people and be like inspired, etc. But I know that there are like other people that really get demotivated, and to see good people out there doing like amazing work. And yeah, not everyone gets motivated by a competition, especially without context. So I think it's a good thing in terms of mindset to sort of focus first on your own work and understand what is not working and what is working, and to assess the actual progress that you've done so that you can be proud of yourself, basically. So what do you need to do regarding all this? I think the main thing is to sort of try to develop a sort of sane approach to what you see out there. Don't like envy and don't feel bad about what you're seeing and about what you're producing. But I actually think that being motivated by this is also like not the really best way either, because I think you really should be driven by yourself and by your own standards and your own idea of what the ideal path you want to walk is like. If your only drive in life is to become as good as Studio X, then what will you do once you're actually as good as they are? Like, you won't have any goal anymore, and you won't like have any point of comparison. So it's kind of like a pointless approach. Also, there's one thing that I think I don't really like with this idea of comparing, is that if you compare yourself, you kind of have to end up copying their style in order to be able to properly compare what you're doing. Whereas like one of the main drive that I have personally is that I want to basically work towards a certain style that I sort of want to make mine, even though it's like not going to be the most original. I want it to be mine in the sense that it's like small twists and fine tuning that are like my own personal approach to a brief and to archviz in general. And if I'm just copying someone in order to sort of assess and compare all the time what I'm doing, then I won't reach the style that I want, but I will only copy and be kind of like always behind people that are actually doing their and building their own style. In the end, it is a funny thing that if everyone was more transparent with their own process, and whether it's like success or failure, we'd all benefit from it. But we would all get like a clearer view of what's out there. But this is not the trend that I'm personally noticing and observing, whether it's on social media or in general, because failure is still something that is frowned upon, even though it is actually the best source of future improvements. So let that sink in. I hope you will have some interesting thoughts after this video, and that you maybe agree or disagree with what I'm saying. I would happily hear what your thoughts are in the comments. And I really invite you to go and dig out your ugliest work so that you can sort of see what you can learn from it. And I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Bye.